we are going to go directly into our next final briefing, which deals with the SHADE Act.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia, and I'll be giving the final briefing for the SHADE Act. Before getting started, I'd like to thank our faculty advisor, Professor Rosen, and the rest of my team for 2 semesters worth of work. On the agenda for today, I'm going to be starting with the environmental problem, then go into the bill, and end with SHADE Strategies for Growth, which is the program we've designed to fund SHADE infrastructure like the one in this image. The environmental problem we're dealing with is extreme heat in New York State. And although last week we got our first snow, a couple months ago we were in the middle of intense heat waves, record-breaking temperatures, and this wasn't only felt in New York City, but throughout the state in areas like Syracuse, Albany, Rochester, and Buffalo, and really any urban area was suffering from this extreme heat. New York State is heating fast. Average summer highs are up 5 degrees since 1901 and are projected to rise another 5 to 9 degrees by the 2050s. On top of that, New York State is expected to see up to 46 more days per year above 90 degrees by the 2050s and up to 6 more heat wave events per year. And a heat wave event is 3 or more consecutive days above 90 degrees. And of course, extreme heat comes with risks. Hospitalizations rise by 10%. This summer in New York City, it was reported that in a single day, there were 112 ER visits related to extreme heat. Additionally, as of 2018, New York City sees 520 heat-exacerbated deaths annually. Extreme heat also comes with public space and economic implications. Public space usage drops by 13%, transit usage drops by 50%, and it is reported that by 2050, New York State will be losing $40.5 billion annually due to decreased productivity. All of this is to say that extreme heat not only comes with public health impacts, but also greatly influences people's ability and desire to be outside. And this is such a big problem in New York State because urban areas amplify the heat. The urban heat island effect is the phenomenon in which the built environment is warmer than its surrounding rural areas because buildings and pavement absorb and retain this heat. To put this into perspective, New York City is about 6.3 degrees warmer than nearby rural areas at night. What this means is that not only is it unbearably hot during the day, but all of this gets trapped, making nights just as bad. And because 88% of New Yorkers live in urban areas, it has the potential to impact 17.2 million people in the state, and this number is only projected to rise as more and more people move from rural areas to urban areas. And this is where the Safe Havens for All Day Enjoyment Act comes in. The SHADE Act is an act that proposes shade infrastructure as a cooling solution and adaptation strategy so that extreme heat and rising temperatures won't have as dramatic as an effect on the state and the residents living in it. The SHADE Act was introduced by Senator Rachel May, and it amends the Urban Development Corporation Act. Specifically, the SHADE Act creates a competitive grant program for municipalities to propose different shade infrastructure projects in their communities. It targets transportation hubs and public gathering spaces as the key areas for these shade infrastructure projects, and it emphasizes mean radiant temperature reduction, which is the temperature that the human body experiences, and the number of people that these shade infrastructure projects have the potential to serve. The SHADE Act also designates the Empire State Development Corporation, known as ESD, as the agency in charge of administering the grant program. ESD is New York State's chief economic development agency, focused on programs that spur investment, job creation, and community development. ESD operates within 10 regions within New York State, which is important for the SHADE Act because the municipalities who will be applying for this grant program will belong to one of these 10 regions throughout the state. So what does the grant program that ESD is overseeing actually look like? Shade Strategies for Growth is the name of the program that will be selecting and funding shade infrastructure projects like these kite canopies on the Little Island, but throughout the entirety of the state. We're going to be looking for at least 20 projects approved throughout the entire state and $100 million allocated to fund these projects. Now, to account for New York City's dense population in relation to the rest of the state, no more than 30% of all these funds will be allowed to go to one region, and we're also having a $5 million minimum per region so that the impacts of these shade infrastructure projects can be felt throughout the entirety of the state. Now, the bill does designate certain criteria that it would like to meet for these projects. So during the application process, municipalities will have to demonstrate their plan to reduce mean radiant temperature, and we're aiming for 3 to 7 degree reduction, as well as a 10 to 30 degree reduction in surface temperature beneath these shade structures. Again, the bill designates that it needs to impact a lot of people, so these shade structures should be proposed in areas with over 1,000 people per square mile. And because ESD is the implementing agency, municipalities will have to show potential for economic growth for these projects. To see this project through, we're going to be hiring 14 full-time employees, 3 as part of our central management team, which will include a director, an assistant director, and an administrative assistant, as well as 1 regional coordinator per office. And again, because New York City is going to be expecting a very dense population, that office will also have a regional assistant. So that gives us a 14 total full-time employees within ESD. In addition, we're going to have an interagency review panel, and this will be for the purpose of reviewing all the applications, then selecting who's going to win. This is a mechanism that ESD does for a lot of their different grant programs when they lack the technical expertise to be able to critically evaluate all the projects being proposed. So the interagency review panel will consist of 1 expert from the Department of Environmental Conservation, 1 expert from the Department of Transportation, and 1 from the New York State Parks and Rec Division, and they will be working with our management team to review all these applications and then select the winners. In terms of who our team reports to, it's important to understand ESD's structure. So the Governor of New York is the one who appoints the leadership within ESD, and this consists of a president and CEO and a board of directors. For the purposes of our program, Shade Strategies for Growth, we're really going to be focusing on the ESD board of directors because they're the ones who have the final approval for any programs or projects over $250,000. And then ESD does have a range of services, but they are pretty versatile in leading grant programs. So they have a loans and grants department specifically for all grant programs, which is where our Shade Strategies for Growth team is going to be living in. For our year 1 budget, it's going to be divided into 2 main broad categories. So we're going to have our allocated funds of $100 million, and our administrative costs, which include salary, travel, equipment, and our overhead and things like that, will be $1.4 million. For our year 1 roadmap, this is really the setup of the program to get these projects launched. So it's divided into 4 different phases. The first one is the program setup. The program setup includes hiring the ESD staff and then designing the program, and then most importantly, the education and outreach to municipalities through info sessions and webinars so that these communities are aware that these grant funds exist and that they can apply to this grant program. Then we go into the award selection. So this is opening the application process and then having all the municipalities submit their projects, and then our interagency review panel along with our core Shade Strategies for Growth management team will be reviewing these applications and based on the selection criteria, selecting which ones will be awarded these funds. Then we go into the ESD approval, which is the internal mechanism process that kind of need to take place for these contracts and milestone agreements to take place, and that is kind of a lengthy process, which is why it takes up a big part of our year 1 roadmap. And then the last part is the launch. So hopefully once all these projects are approved, these projects can start building. And this is essentially the green light so that municipalities can begin building their shade infrastructure, which can look like many different things. For example, a municipality can propose to build a bus stop, which would cost anywhere from $6,000 to $40,000, depending on the materials that are used. But it can also end on the bigger side, like this pavilion in Staten Island, which costs $6.6 million to build. The key takeaway is that Shade Strategies for Growth gives municipalities the freedom to cater their design to their community needs. So really, they can propose anything that their community wants and desires as long as it hits that selection criteria that we will be looking for. And overall success of the program will be to fund as many of these programs as possible. And to measure this long-term, we're hoping to have 100% of the funds dispersed, and again, long-term, 90% completion rate. In terms of our year 1 and which projects we'll be selecting, the projects we'll be selecting will have a potential to reduce mean radiant temperature by 3 to 7 degrees, and a potential to reduce temperature reduction by 10 to 30 degrees. And the potential for number of people served and stimulating economic growth is also just as important because the overall goal of the bill and this program is to help municipalities lower temperatures and really enable the long-term enjoyment of outdoor spaces in the face of extreme heat and rising temperatures. Thank you. Any questions?
So you mentioned $100 million budget. That's a big number. I'm wondering if there's a plan in place to generate that amount because it is so large.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the bill doesn't designate the budget, whereas it designates ESD to create the budget. And ESD, $100 million is a big number, but for ESD, they have many programs that are $100 million worth. So these are the kind of different funding mechanisms we would get. The appropriations fund, which is $306 million, but the big bulk of where this would come from is from authority bonds, which are capital projects, which is $2 billion. So these $100 million would come from a variety of these ways, which is how most of ESD's capital projects are funded.
Thank you for that really great presentation. I'm curious if you have any information on kind of the selection criteria for choosing projects. Let's say if there are two proposed projects of bus stops being built and they would have the same temperature reduction, like how do you choose where to allocate the money?
Yeah, that's a great question. So overall, we didn't get into the details of this for the presentation, but ESD grant program applications are scored out of 100 points. So overall, if there are two projects that are very similar, we would take the criteria and see which one scored higher to fund that project. But again, the overall goal is to fund as many projects as we can. But if it comes down to it, we would choose which one had a higher 100-point score during the application process.
Thanks for a great presentation. I noticed that most of your images included human-made structures, but your last image included trees. And so I'm wondering if planting trees would be eligible under this program, or if it's mostly, gray infrastructure that you're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, this bill inspires creativity. So anything that is a shade structure and has the potential to reduce temperature and spur economic activity would be eligible. So trees and natural resources are a great way of providing shade. And honestly, based on the summer presentation and the science, they're better at lowering temperatures than the built environment is.